Okay, welcome back. And we are on the second video of Chapter 7, and we're going to extend the contribution margin model that we worked on in the first video. So in the first video of Chapter 7, we learned the contribution margin model, and we looked at how we could explore break-even and target profit calculations. And that is the cost volume profit model. Now, we're going to take that same thing that we did in the first video, and the first video was a little longer because you can't really explain part of the base contribution margin model without explaining kind of all the pieces. So it was a little bit longer, but now we're going to extend it in a couple of different ways. So the two things that we're going to do is we're going to take sort of a what-if scenario. What if we change the sales price, or if we change the variable cost price or the fixed cost amount, and then recalculate it and see what happens. We're also going to look at most companies have more than one product. So how can we use this CVP, this cost volume profit model, or the contribution margin model, when we have more than one product? So we're going to take a look at that. And as you can see, I'm not going to cover all of the questions that are assigned because they are very similar. So you will be able to, from the ones I do explain, you should be able to look through the others and figure them out. Okay, so working on the same scenario that we had before, this dinner cruise. And we've got tickets for 50, variable costs of 30, and we actually have the information here that we had from last time. That is, the break-even units was 10,500, and the break-even sales was 525,000. So our what-if scenario here is, what if we change the sales price, keep everything else the same, but change the sales price from 50 to 45? Well, all we do is we refigure this. And it could be something that your sales department says, okay, I think we can pull in a whole bunch more customers if we cut the price by $5 if we have a sale. And now you, as the managerial accountant, as the cost accountant, you got to say, well, how many more guests are we going to need to make this sale work? In other words, under the regular price, we would need 10,500 tickets or customers. What would be the new thing, the new break-even point if we reduce the price, keeping everything else the same? So we figured it out just like we did before. We have the new price. We still have the variable cost of 30, and the contribution margin is 15. So you could see previously the contribution margin was 20. We go ahead and figure this out like we did in the last video, 210,000. And we're still looking at no profit. We're not interested in a certain profit level. We're just looking at what's the break even. We carry this down, and our break-even units ends up being 14,000. And you notice that the previous break-even units was 10,500s. So if your sales department says, I think we can pull in 5,000 or 6,000 extra people, well, that might be worth it. You would end up making more. You'd be much higher than the break-even. So that's the number of tickets you need to sell. Well, what is the actual sales level? Well, we're going to do the same thing we did before. Here, we're going to carry this $15 of contribution margin per ticket sold. The price is no longer 50. The price is now 45. And so we're going to have a ratio of 33. And actually, you might end up wanting to carry that out. It's actually pretty easy to figure out, even though we've got some decimal points here. So once again, we're not figuring out for a specific income level. This ratio is this 33, and now what we're saying is this number is 1/3, 33.33% of why does it keep doing that? There we go. Of what bigger number? So in other words, if we just multiply that by 3 or divide by 1/3, and it comes out to 630,000. So the previous break-even sales was 525. We could see up here. The new break-even sales with the reduced price, but keeping everything else the same, is 630,000. Okay, so it does have a couple of questions. A decrease in the sales price, okay, will decrease the contribution margin per unit. Yes, we can see that. It goes from 20 to 15. And the contribution margin ratio, yes. The break-even point will increase. Well, it will. And this is all dependent, and this is why we would consider this a what-if scenario. What if we did this? What else would have to happen? So let's look at a slightly different what-if scenario. So our second what-if scenario is, okay, we keep the ticket price the same, but we somehow reduce the cost. And in the explanation, there was something about giving them less food. Maybe there wasn't an appetizer or something like this. But this is what businesses do all the time. They say, how can we keep the price the same, but reduce the cost? What A is our break even, and B, can we get a whole lot more profit? So exactly the same thing that we did before. All we're going to do is take the new set of numbers and recalculate. And we can compare it to the previous one. So we're going to have a price of 50. Now the new variable cost is 20, so the contribution margin has gone up. This contribution margin was 20, right? This was a contribution margin of 20. So it's gone up. We're getting an extra $10 per ticket sold. And as you could see, we could do two things at once, right? We could say, what if we cut the price to 45 and reduce the cost? And that would create a whole nother scenario that we'd have to figure out. Okay, we're going to do the same calculation here to figure out what is our break-even units. We're not looking for a specific income. We pull this down. And our new break-even units is 7,000. So whereas before our break-even units was 10,500, our new break-even units is 7,000. And you have to remember, this is just what if kind of information to help you understand how you can move these things around. Now, in the real world, you probably can't just cut out an extra $10 worth of goods without reducing the price. In other words, you may not be able to keep this many customers. But it's important to show that if you did cut the costs, you could survive on fewer customers, as long as those customers were willing to continue to pay $50. So similarly, what if that's the number of tickets that we need to sell? What is the total sales level? Well, we're going to use the contribution margin ratio. So we would take this 30. This is the unit CM, and the price is 50. So this is going to be a ratio of 60%. So we're still looking at it for a fixed expense of 210,000, and the ratio is 60%. And so this is going to be a break-even sales of 350,000. Now, I think the next question has something where actually the fixed expense changes. So you would do all of these similar things, except you would just have a new number here in the fixed expense to get your answer. And so the question here is a decrease in the sales price. Okay. Actually, I think it's a decrease in the variable cost will increase the contribution margin per unit and the CM ratio, right? And the break-even point will decrease. So I think I actually forgot to change that there. Okay, so that should get you on the way. Once again, it's just a repeat of what we were doing in the first video. It's just you're plugging in new numbers and comparing it to the old setup. Now we're going to look at what happens, what do we do when we have more than one product? For the most part, we look at a weighted average. So if you have two numbers, for example, if you've got 20 and 60, what is the average of these two numbers? Well, you would say it is 40. But what if you have 5 times as many of these as you do of these? In other words, you would have 100 and you'd have 60 of this. Then the weighted average would be a different weighted average. Now, I say this because, let's actually erase this. A lot of times people don't understand kind of what the weighted average means. And will focus on a simple average. A weighted average just means you have more of one than the other. Therefore, the weighting will pull it towards the thing that you have more of. And when we talk about weighted average in cost, volume, profit, we usually are talking about the word sales mix. In other words, we may have two products, and we have two products, a regular cruise and an executive cruise. And you can see we've got two different sales prices and two different costs. Well, it looks like they're kind of robbing the executives blind. They're charging them $100, twice the regular price, but only an extra $40, only an extra $10. Oh well, I guess that's what you get when you're an executive. So, but what is the rate at which they sell them? Well, they sell, for every one executive cruise, they actually sell 4 regular cruises. So we need to keep these two numbers in mind, because these are the weightings. In other words, if it was just 1-to-1, we could take a simple average of adding the numbers together and dividing by 2. But because we have a mix, a sales mix, a weighting of 4-to-1, we're going to use that 4-to-1. So we're going to have a similar table that we had before. I've just put them in columns so it allows us to look at them at the same time. Now notice it's still the sales price. We're still looking for the contribution margin here, right? So here we're just going to fill this in. We're going to say the sales price is 50. This is 100. The variable cost is 30, and the variable cost is 40. And you can see the contribution margin here is 20 and 60. Now, how we do the weighting is we say we have, for every one executive, we've got 4 of these. So let's say in a month we have a normal amount of sales. Well, we would end up having 4 regular cruises and 1 executive cruise. And what we do is we multiply these two numbers. So we would say we have $80 worth of contribution margin in the regular and 60. We would add those two together. Well, we'd say there's a total of 5 things, and the total amount of contribution margin is going to be 140. So rather than just taking 20 plus 60 and divide by 2, which would be 40, we would actually take the multiplied amounts and divide. So 140 divided by 5, that's going to be 28. So just as I was saying, if you just took these two, took 20 plus 60 and divide by 2, you would have a simple margin of 40. But remember, we sell a lot more of the regular than the executive. In other words, it's not going to be right in the middle of these two. It's going to be closer. Our average meal is going to be closer to the regular than the executive, because we're selling more 20s than we are 60s. And there's a couple of little questions about that. The weighted average is less than the simple average, right? 28 is less than 40 because you sell more of the regular ones. You sell more of the 20s than the 60s, so it's not exactly in the middle. The weighted average CM is higher than the CM of the regular cruises. Well, that makes sense, because we're not just selling the 20s, we're selling a couple 60s. For every 4 20s, we're selling 160. So the average is going to be pulled up higher than the 20. And it says here the sales mix has a higher weighted average CM, so they can sell fewer cruises. That's right. So if you were just selling all regular cruises, you would have to sell one amount. But because you're throwing in every once in a while, you're selling a pricier executive cruise, well, you can get away with maybe not having as many cruises, or at least hitting the break even. So that is actually, this whole concept is carried over into the next question. So if we figured out, the main idea here was just to figure out this number. What was the weighted average contribution margin per unit of the regular and the executive? That means not looking at any particular meal or any particular cruise. If I just randomly select a group of them, it's going to on average be 28, even though some are more and some are less. So when we come down here, well, now we want to use that information to figure out what are the break-even units. In other words, okay, if I'm selling regular and executive cruises, how many tickets do I need to sell? Well, we're going to use, rather than the regular contribution, I mean, we'd normally just use this when we only have one item. But because we have multiple items, we're going to use the weighted average. So this particular calculation is exactly the same as what we did before. So notice that we're still going to do the same things we did before. The only thing that's different is we had to do one extra step. We had to figure out this weighted average. And then we can use this as plug and play as we did before. We're still going to have 210,000. We're still looking for break even, so we're not looking for operating income. And instead of in a regular weighted average margin, we're going to use this 28. And so the break even units are 7,500. Well, what does that mean? Well, we know that the total amount of cruise dinners or cruise tickets that we need to sell is 7,500 to break even. But what is the breakout? What is how many of the regulars and how many of the executives do I need to sell? Well, this is this 7,500 of the mix of the two. Well, if the 7,500, we'll take this down here. 7,500 is the total number of break-even units. Well, we have to go back and look at what is the sales mix. So the sales mix was this line right here. So we're going to say the regular is going to be 4 out of 5. You could say 80% or 4/5, and we're going to say the executive is 1 out of 5. And that's all we're going to do down here is take the sales mix and plug it back in. So we're going to say, well, the regular represented 4 out of every 5 of these items, and the executive represented 1 out of every 5 of these items. So if we figure that out, 80% times this, or 4/5 times that, 6,000 of these tickets are going to be regular cruises, and 1,500 is going to be the amount of executive cruises. Okay, so that is the weighted average cost contribution margin per unit. You might have to look at this a couple of times just because sometimes it doesn't sink in how to figure out how to do the weighted average, but it should come, and it's not that that difficult once you do it a couple of times. It's just this one extra step. Okay, as always, if you have questions, please visit me on the Zoom office hours or send me an email. Thank you.